Okay, by now we have talked about the hierarchical navigation. We talked about the fact that we start with a single page app and then we can go forward and push a view controller on the navigation stack. And if you want to come back, we can, of course, from the push call the pop and go back to the previous view controller which was displayed. We also talk about adding the navigation controller, and navigation controller allows us to go back by having a back button at the top, which is replaced with the screen title if the screen title for the previous view controller was provided. We also talked about the function being available, where if we have really gone deep into the navigation stack, then we simply can call pop to the navigation root view controller and pop back to the root view controller. In this video, we are going to talk about is flat navigation. As you can see in flat navigation, there are multiple entry points. As you can see these boxes at the top, and they exist as peers, and then each one can have their own navigation stack. And a good example for flat navigation is basically a tab bar controller. So let's look at how we can add a tab bar controller to our iOS application. Now we're going to start with the example of our mortgage calculator, which was a single page app. I'm just going to hit the play button so that we can actually see it, and it's a single page app. And I want to add a tab bar controller to the same. So we go back to the storyboard. I'm going to just reduce the size so I can see the entire storyboard. And in here, after selecting the view controller, I'm simply going to go to editor and say embed in a tab bar controller. And when I do so, you can see the entry point becomes, the initial becomes the tab bar controller, which has a tab bar at the bottom. And it has got the the initial view controller, which was our mortgage calculator, which is now present as one of the tabs inside the tab bar controller. You can see these items which are being added at the bottom, and we'll talk about them in a bit. But let's talk about how do we go about adding a new controller to the tab bar controller itself. The process actually remains very much similar, which is you go to the library, you search for your view controller. I find my view controller and I'm gonna drop it here. Okay, so this is my second view controller that I have created. Now I need a controller here to actually have some implementation. So I'm going to say file, new file. I'm going to create a CocoaTouch class, and let's do a a web view controller. So I'm just going to call it a Redfin view controller. I'm just going to build a web view which shows the Redfin side. And the reason of choosing them is because I am making a mortgage calculator, so it makes sense to show a website which actually is related to home mortgages some way or home sales some way. So going back to our main view controller, I have the second view controller ready. I definitely need to add something to functionality wise to this view controller. So I'm gonna go forward and I'm going to add the WebKit. So I'm gonna drop it somewhere, and I'm going to go to constraints, and I'm going to define saying I want it to occupy the entire size of the screen. Done. So my web view is now ready. Now I need to link my web view to my controller. So the way I will do it is I will go back to my controller, and in this case I can go in here and select my controller, and inside my controller I will see that it's linked to UI view controller right now, and I will change it to say Redfin view controller. So I got the wiring done just like we did for a simple single page application, very much similar to the same. So it's a Redfin view controller, but now I need to provide a linkage. I need to provide an outlet for this web view inside my view controller. So I will close the assistants, and I'm gonna open up the assistant mode, and I want to go to the Redfin view controller. Coming back in here, I'm gonna drag and drop my outlet inside my Redfin view controller, and I'm gonna just call it main web view. Cool. So now I don't need my assistant controller anymore. The linkage has been established, and it's complaining that okay, can't find WK WebView because I need to import the WebKit library provided by iOS. Now once that's done, inside my view did load, I need to basically display the Redfin website. And for that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to um, define first of all a constant, which is the Redfin URL, and it's going to be URL with string and https www.redfin.com. So I get the URL. I basically had a string converted into a URL object. Now I need to convert this to a web request. Okay, so I'm gonna go forward and say web request and say URL request, and it's gonna accept a URL object, and I have the Redfin URL created by now, and I am going to go forward and pass on the URL object to my web request. Now I need to go forward and do something with this web request. And it's just complaining that, okay, whenever you pass it a URL object, it may or may not be written because it's an optional. So you have to basically unwrap it. Ideally speaking, I should use optional binding, but for now, I'm just gonna force unwrap it. Now, once I have the web request handy, all I need to do is that go back to my WebView and call upon its load functionality. And inside the load functionality, I'm going to go forward and pass it the web request. So I'm going to call load, and I'm going to pass it the web request. And that's it. It will load up my Redfin view controller. Again, it's nothing to do with the tab bars, but I'm just needed to add a second view controller for demonstration purposes. So I went forward and added my second view controller. Now let's get to the tab bar. For tab bar, remember the tab bar controller is the first controller which you're seeing here. Most portion of the screen is not there, just has the tabs at the bottom. So when you're trying to define the linkage, or you want to add a new tab, you find a new controller which you define in storyboard, and you want to link to this particular tab, you start from the tab bar controller and you select the tab and which shows item, and you right click upon it, and you will see that it defines all the gesture organizers. Now, if you select the tab bar controller though, it will give you the option for triggered segs, and that's what you are interested in. Again, if you just select the item, it tells you the tab bar gestures, like what kind of gesture you want the tab bar to handle or any delegates. But if you select the tab bar controller, that's where you see the list of the view controllers which are part of the tab bar. And here you want to hit the plus icon and drop it to the view controller. And now you have the second item which is handy. Now, thing is, both are called item, and that's not very handy. I want to call one calculator and other one to something like Redfin. So how should I do that? One of the easiest way to do that is to just go forward, and actually that's the standard way of doing it is you just select the item. Now, you don't go forward and edit the item here, but you select the item on the individual controller because the controller owns its own item, and you basically can double click upon it. And since it's so small, let me zoom in so you guys can see it, and I can change it to say calculator, and I can come back here, and instead this time I can call this guy Redfin. So I've given it two different names. Now I save my storyboard, and now let's put on some icon as well for my tab bar. And as you can see is I can go forward and define a UI image class, which I may have defined inside my assets catalog. I do not have image right now, so I'm going to just use some default which is provided by the system. Just these are not going to make much sense right now, but just for image demonstration purposes, I'm just going to go forward and put favorites for my um, a mortgage calculator, and I'm gonna call upon bookmarks to indicate it's a web request for my um, Redfin screen. I can definitely go forward and define a title here as well, so that I can still do. And but at the moment I do it, I'm basically moving it to the custom, so I won't need an image. So just explaining why I'm doing this here. So I'm just choose some defaults for now, but in reality you would want to use some image, and you would want to go forward with your own custom name rather than the default names which have been provided here. Now all that is done, I have the two view controllers. We have got two items which have been mapped here. Let's go forward and hit the play button, see what happens. and it runs. I can see both the tabs, and as you can see, the tabs have the names which I have given. Now, again, important thing to note is that even though the segs were controlled by the tab bar controller, I right click upon the tab bar controller, go into the view controllers and edit it. But the items itself are controlled by the individual screens. Now, each screen knows what it wants to represent, so it's very good practice for from encapsulation perspective for the screen to maintain control of what it wants to display its name as. And that's how iOS has went forward and implemented it. Now I can always go forward and click on the bookmark, and you can see that it brings up the Redfin screen for me. I can go forward and put in some zip code, whichever I like, and you can see the houses in that particular community. And you can go forward and select a particular house as well and see the details about the listing. So you have a full functioning app, but this screen is just having tab bar functionality, or sorry, WebView functionality, and this screen is the native functionality. But you can see back, like in flat navigation, you here have a flat navigation for entry points, and then each one can actually drill down deeper and deeper and can have its own navigation tree altogether. But these are separate navigation starting point each for each one of them. So even if I'm drilling down in here and ending up in a different screen, um, there is nothing changing on the model character. When I click on it, I come back there. When I go back to Redfin, I still am on the same screen because they are they are independent. Next, we'll talk about content driven and experience driven navigation in our next video.